what we now know as Crossroads South. How many of you ever went to Crossroads South? Okay, so I learned my writing and my world building in that building. Writing was downstairs in the corridor next to where the buses drop you off, which is where English was, and upstairs in the science department where we kind of did a little bit more interesting stuff. Okay, a little bit about me. Husband, father, new grandfather, again. My day job is working with communications, telephone systems, and preventing telecom fraud. Something I do for fun is write books to help relax. So, first novel, The One, came out back in March. 1st of March, debuted on Amazon at number 98 in hard science fiction. A number that I am constantly trying to recover. Their algorithms are a little funky. Other things I have written, back in '93, I was at a company where somebody dumped an ashtray into a trash can and burned down an entire floor of our office building. $350,000 worth of computer equipment destroyed in 2.5 minutes. Fire department said the temperature reached 1,400 degrees. More recently, I literally wrote the chapter on Telecom Fraud 101 in the Essentials of Cybersecurity, kind of giving a background. Okay, got started. I've always been reading science fiction, fantasy, and pretty much anything else I can get my hands on. Learned world building here in over there in the high school, I should say, back before it was moved to this building. And it actually didn't happen, the world building didn't happen from English. I had a science teacher who was the advisor to the D&D club. Okay? We were what has become the Big Bang Theory kind of people back before it was popular. Okay? So we set out and said, okay, we want to build our own game world. Why does magic work? So we had to build an entire concept of why does it work? What is the world like? Why is there magic? What are the rules of the magic? So we put in 2 suns and said that this had something to do with it and created all sorts of logic around that. And that kind of got me started in the concept of how to build a world. So given that, I'm going to digress before I go into world building a little bit about the publishing world today. I did something a little off-standard. Most of the books you have in the library come from what is known as traditional publishing. You get an agent, you get published by a big publishing house, and in the past they do the cover, the editing, and the marketing, and get you all of the writing and everything, and they push the whole thing and then you get a percentage in the royalty. Today, that's not the way it works. They want you to do the editing, they'll help with the cover, they'll help with a little bit of marketing. They want you to be media savvy, so you actually are going out and doing the social media, pushing it on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, everything that you can. They want you to be pushing it to sell the book for them. They don't want to spend the money on it. Okay? The other opposite end of the extreme is what's called self-publishing. You write it, you upload it to the Amazon portal or to Ingram Spark, upload it, they will create an ebook, they will create a paperback, and they will then distribute it for you. And again, you do the bulk of the work on marketing. The advantage is you get most of the royalties that way. Whatever the book costs to sell, less that times your percentage, you get a chunk. In between, there's what's called hybrid publishing, which is what I have. Okay, I'm part of a company which is called Purple Toga Publishing. They're based out of Sydney. And the idea is, I wrote it, I'm doing the marketing, I uploaded it to Amazon and everything. They helped with finding the editors, finding the cover artists and everything else, and making it possible and helping with the marketing of the book. So they're doing part of it, but I still do most of it, but I get some professional assistance. I actually started writing the book and got involved with a contest. Okay, I don't know if any of you are familiar with a website or YouTube channel called Geek and Sundry. Okay, they were doing a contest with one of the with Inkshares at that point for hard science fiction books. And the idea for the book was the top 3 winners out of this contest got their book reviewed by the National Science Academy division that checks movies for accuracy. So they were actually going to make sure your book was correct and help you write it. then publish it for you and help you possibly get a movie deal. Needless to say, I did not come in the top 3. I came in 6th out of 92, so I consider that a pretty good success considering the book was only half written. A lot of the contests out there right now are more scam than legit, because you need to go and get into the contest means you are going out and marketing it, trying to sell it. You hit 250, you hit 500, therefore you win particular categories of editing, publishing, and services from them. But again, you are doing all the work, and they're just doing it after you've covered their costs. And after that, you get the royalties. The last category, which is almost 100% scam, is called vanity publishing, where they will charge you $1,000 to publish your book, and then you get to keep the royalties. Now, you can do this if you want one book, you can get it real cheap. If you're doing it like one book for mom's birthday of all the pictures of the family or things like that. If you want to do a regular novel, it's not the right way. You shouldn't be paying somebody else to do this. So the first piece of advice I have for you, check out through the various online sources, what is a scam, what is legit, who's real in this, because there are a lot of people out there, and all too many of us have gotten burned. Okay, so back to, what is world building? Anybody have a guess?
Creating a world for your novel, like what's different about it, or like if there's any changes between that and knowing the world.
It's a good start, yes. What is the setting or the world that your novel takes place in? Okay? Find me afterwards. I have gifts for those who answer questions. I'm encouraging interaction. Okay? So the idea is, how do you build a world? Okay? Went down to one of my writer groups and started asking them, talking to a group about writing is not my normal business. Put me up in front of a bunch of people wearing suits and ties for business, 800, 1,000 of them, no problem. A group of high school students about writing, it's not a topic I'm used to talking about. So I said, okay, what should I talk about? 2 things that they gave me out of the group were, most important things to remember about world building is you need to make it believable and consistent. If it's not a consistent world, people will lose that sense of suspension of disbelief, and they stop reading in the middle. The worst thing that happens is they stop reading in the middle, and they're never going to recommend it to anybody else unless they're going to tell them, don't ever read it, it's horrible. You need to make the book believable. If somebody is riding an animal with 4 legs that they use to get from place A to place B, I don't care if it's a lizard, if it's a dinosaur, whatever else, call it a horse. Use words that people are familiar with. Don't try to invent the concept of a fork. Your readers have the same cultural background and idea. Use the words. You can say, okay, and the horse is green and has scales, but if you say that it's a horse, they understand its function, what it means. It doesn't have to actually be a horse as we use it normally. So try not to reinvent things too often. Okay? People keep trying to invent foreign and interesting languages. Okay? Tolkien went wonderful and created the Elven language. They went and created Klingon. All these things are great. Don't reinvent words that you don't have to. If you're sticking to writing standard English, use standard English words. It helps your readers connect to what you're writing and feel more comfortable with it and feel like they're part of the story better. The minute you start having to go and say, oh yeah, and he picked up the thingamabob to eat his food and it has 3 prongs, and, like, you've lost somebody, you're telling them too much. They should feel it, it should flow. Okay, the other thing is, world building is kind of like an iceberg, hence the ever popular photo. Okay? What you actually show or tell your people about what's going on is only a small part of what you know about the world. So you build a village. You may know what goes on around the village, you may have a rough idea of the rest of the world, but your character doesn't, so you don't talk about it, unless it's part of dialogue or something. So you don't have to build the whole thing. Think about it in general, and understand that you can build the one village for book 1, and then they go exploring in book 2. So that's when you start building the rest of the country, the rest of the world. You don't have to go crazy on building it all at once. And don't be surprised when your character starts wandering around and you have to add things that you hadn't considered. It happens in everything you write. Okay? The hardest part of this, actually, before I change, is people have the problem with what I refer to as the white paper or the jigsaw puzzle problem. It's blank. Where do I start? Where do I find the anchor point for my world so I know what I'm doing? You choose a type of story, you choose a type of situation. They say that there are only 8 kinds of books in the world. Okay, the boy meet girl, the exploration, all of these things, regardless of where you're writing, if it's a mystery, a western, a science fiction, a fantasy, the characters are people. Regardless of what else they are, they're people. They need to have a reason for being there, some sort of interaction, some sort of a feeling as to why you're writing about them. Okay, unless you're just writing a travel guide, at which point it really doesn't matter. And I'll be honest, this started that way a little bit because I was using Gulliver's Travel as a kind of concept for describing each of the colonies and how they work. But then that's not enough to make somebody want to read it, not feel compelled. So you need to make the story, what happened, why are they there, who are they dealing with? And it's the people that make the story. Okay, sometimes science is one of the characters, sometimes animals are part of the characters. You look at Game of Thrones, the dragons are one of the characters. Okay, but it's the interaction between characters, not the setting, that makes a difference. That's just the world that they live in. Okay, very few of you actually probably think about the mechanics of the bus that you use to get to and from school. Okay, it's not important to you. It's part of those normal everyday things that are kind of like, it's there, so you mention it in passing, but don't go into a whole schematic diagram explaining it. So understand it, and understand that it has to be real, and that the readers only need to know so much. One example I give on that is Robert Heinlein wrote a story called Destination Moon. He wrote 7 pages an explanation of how he was going to be one vision through the porthole. When the book was published, that was 2 sentences. And when they did the movie, it was 20 seconds worth of view out of the porthole to know, do they see the Earth, do they see the moon, do they see the sun, what do they see out of that particular view in that particular direction. He spent 7 pages mapping it out, and then it became 2 sentences. Know when to cut. Okay? When you want to start writing, they give you long lists of, these are the rules, this is the secret to being a writer. They're lying. There are effectively 3 rules you need to understand about writing. Okay? If you don't write it, it doesn't get written. Sounds simple. Doesn't mean you need to block out hours and hours every day of sitting there. 5 minutes a day, every day, means that in 6 months you have a full novel. 5 minutes a week means it probably takes you about a year. Okay? And depending on what kind of a novel you're writing, depends on if that's 40,000 words, 80,000 words, 150,000 words. Different genres have different standard counts. But if you don't do the actual writing, it doesn't get done. Second thing, and your English teachers will tell you this to no end, first drafts are not meant to be read by anybody else. Okay? The first draft, by definition, is meant to be thrown away. Because get everything you can onto the paper or the screen or whatever you're using to write, because you need to get the ideas out. There'll be holes, there'll be things that you wrote. I wrote a 3-page description on what to do in things like we had this morning, the emergency drill. Okay, every time you get on a plane, they give you that same 5-minute lecture. This is how you buckle your seat. If we're going over water, this is where your life jacket is. And I started writing that whole thing based on all the things that could go wrong in a spaceship. And after I went back and looked at it for the second edit, I looked at it and said, that's 7 pages of putting people to sleep. Nobody wants to read that. So the whole thing all 7 pages got cut and got put into one flashback scene for 3 sentences later on when there was an actual emergency. And he's like, oh yeah, I remember that they said that if this happens, do that. So I had to map it out in my head and decided, okay, it's there, but there's no way you want to read all of that. Okay, it's just boring. Important, but boring. And this comes to the show, don't tell. So by giving the whole lecture, I was telling everybody rather than showing what was relevant. Okay? So the first version is going to have holes, going to have spelling errors, going to have grammar mistakes, things that you meant to put in or you thought you put in or that you had clear in your head that didn't actually make it to the screen. Go through, finish writing it, get everything out, and then when it's done, wait a couple days, reread it from beginning to end, and go through it. At some point, you're going to have to read it out loud or have the computer read it out loud, especially the dialogue, because what looks okay when you're writing sounds awkward. It doesn't sound like somebody really talks like that unless you're doing Shakespearean writing. Okay? If you're talking about somebody who's living in the modern day and they sound like they're William Shakespeare's character, your writing is stilted and it doesn't feel right. You need to do that, okay? I had a lot of people come back to me and go, okay, you need to use contractions more because that's the way people talk. The hardest part was trying to get the proper way of speaking for a 4-year-old. So he really, really, really likes things. Okay, it's lots of W's and very few R's. Okay, spell check hates that. But it was necessary for the story because it was one of the things to bring it along. It gave me an excuse to get my grandson into the book. Okay, so second drafts are when things start coming together. This book went through a total of 7 drafts, and I wrote it, I went through a professional editor, I went through Microsoft Word editing, spell check and grammar, Google Docs, spell check and grammar, Grammarly, spell check and grammar, and it still got published with mistakes. Every book that is a first edition has mistakes. Just put out the second edition on this one because somebody pointed out your beauty pageant has last year's winner wearing her sash that says 2051. But you're doing the competition for 2152. Did you really mean for it to be 100 years between the two competitions? Like, oops. I had another point where this one, because of what it was in its travel guide, I had to outline it out where we are in each day of the month. And I ended up having 2 Sundays and no Saturday. So everything that was supposed to happen over the 2 days got squeezed into one, and it just didn't work. These mistakes happen, you go through it, and some of those we didn't catch until the 3rd round of beta readers went through. Other people had just read it and had missed these details. Okay? Every book in here that is a first edition has at least one mistake in it. Probably a lot more. That's just the way first editions are. Professionally done or independent writing, there are mistakes. Don't kill yourself to make it perfect. Make it as good as you can and get it out. Okay? But this means having people read it. Beta readers are incredibly important. Have somebody who actually understands the Chicago Manual of Style read through it. I'm still trying to get used to the idea that I don't have to put 2 spaces after every period. Okay? This is the way we were taught because I actually learned originally on the typewriters. Okay? This is just the way you learn the rules, and you have to learn to adjust. Okay. There are a lot of resources for help to write your book. How to build a story, how to come up with a concept. How many of you know Dr. Who? Everybody's at least heard of Dr. Who? So we'll start with the obvious one. Okay? Absolutely perfect reference. You're standing in a library, or in this case, sitting. The amount of resources that are physically here are immense. Okay? How many of you know Game of Thrones? Game of Thrones is based on a real-world set of wars and battles for the throne, the War of the Roses. Okay? He took it, said, okay, this is a great starting point. What if I add dragons and I do this and I do this? And he built out based on a concept. The number of cultures and ideas that are available here in the library from things worldwide is immense. Come up with an idea, a culture, a politics, economic, all of it, you'll find examples in the library or on the internet that will give you the resources to start. And then what you do is take a little time, look at what happened, how people interacted, how people worked in those cultures, because this is the kinds of things that will happen in yours. I don't care if it's medieval England, this is the same thing, or the Old West. You look at Firefly, Firefly is exactly the Old West done with ray guns. Okay? The same kinds of people are people. How they respond to stress, how they respond to things will be the same regardless of the setting or the tools. So look at what's been done, try to learn from the past to use it. The other thing is enjoy the research. The craziest thing I did was researching this book is I actually found out somebody paid for proper scientific research to determine what is the best gravity to make French fries. I kid you not. They literally did a scientific paper, got a grant, $100,000 euros, got permission and used the centrifuge that they used to train astronauts at the European Space Agency, put a special built pressure cooker sealed it, and spun it around at different gravities to make French fries. 7 different times to determine what was the right gravity to make the perfect French fry. Okay, and I'm sure you're all wondering what was the answer. 3 gravities. Surprisingly, at 3 gravities, you get the exactly perfect crisp on the outside and soft moist in the middle. Completely crazy. And somebody paid for this. And more importantly, somebody got paid to actually taste test every fry and rate them. Now, that's the job I like. Okay? This kind of stuff is out there, and it's amazing the kind of things that you can find doing simple Google searches and research. You'd be surprised at the stuff you can find. Okay? So the next idea is use writer groups. You have classes here, you have teachers, people who can read, give advice, give services. Once you're out of here or want to do it separate from school, you have various groups. I personally think very highly of Facebook group Sci-Fi Roundtable. They are 2,400 or so people who are all authors. None of us are competing with each other. Even when you're writing the exact same book, we had 4 different people doing versions of Robin Hood at one point. All of the stories were different, from different points of views. This one's in space, this one's made married. Each of them were doing it, they were able to compare stories and histories and weren't competing. We're not competing for the same book dollar, we're not competing for the same competition. We're all trying to write the best book possible to get it out to people to read. So if you have a question, the best thing that they do is people will come up with 2 book covers. Do you like A or B? 50 people will respond to that answer. 40 of them will say, I like A. 10 of them will say, I like A because. And these are the ones that are the most valuable. And you will find lots of people giving advice. The blurb on the back of my book. Okay? What do I write so people know when they look at Amazon what the book is about? Okay? Just simple paragraph. She read part of it earlier. Okay? You put it up and say, is this a good blurb? Is it too long? Does it grab your attention? Would you want to read this book? And you will get people who will give you, needs to be changed, or this is good. And these kinds of things, and beta readers are immensely important. I had a friend who gave me, I just read a beta of her book, it comes out next month, and it was 6 short stories following one character who's a lawyer who deals with problems of robots when robots have no rights yet. And he's constantly trying to get them out of trouble or solving things. And they're building along, and somewhere in short story number 4, he goes off planet. You get to short story number 6, and they talk about this is your first time off planet. I'm like, no, the timeline doesn't work. There's a consistency problem. Nobody else had caught it because they all read them individually, not as one lump sum. So what you need is you need people who are going to read it for spelling, grammar, content, and does the story make sense? Does it flow? Is there, now this piece is a little weak, you need to meet it up. Now this is boring as hell, cut it out. Okay? And you need people who will do that. And these various groups and writing critique groups are incredibly useful. Okay? Friends and family are immensely important. Okay? For this novel, when I first conceived of the idea of actually writing it down, I'm like, okay, I got a spaceship. I want to have a 0 gravity swimming pool. So I was thinking about putting one in, I think it's Inception. No. What's the one? Jennifer Lawrence was swimming in the big ball of water. Passenger, thank you. Okay? The concept of the ball of the water in Passenger is 100% wrong. They screwed up the physics completely. How do I know this? Because my family tore it apart when I tried to do the same thing. Surface tension will not hold a ball in form. Once you start swimming inside the ball, you start kicking it out and it starts breaking apart into lots of bubbles. What happens when you accelerate or decelerate? Where does the ball go splash? What happens when you are actually in the ball with no gravity? Where do the air bubbles go? Air bubbles don't rise if there's no gravity. They just kind of cluster around your head. At which point you've got this big ball of fog because you've got lots of air bubbles that you can't see through. And we went through all of these things. And I'm like, okay, I can't do that. So I ended up putting it into its own little glass wall like an aquarium with airlocks to get in and rebreathers so nobody's breathing out oxygen. It's all getting processed. Everything is clean. And I could do that and can get away with the effect I want without having this, it doesn't work with physics. These kinds of concepts are amazing, and what works in your head, somebody else goes, I don't get it. I have pirates in my story. My son said, wait, how do you make space piracy economically viable? You need to buy fuel, you need to buy spaceships, you need to be able to maintenance. How do you make something like this actually work? So I have to actually go back and explain out what was clear in my head, the economics of making piracy work when you're dealing with pirates that are on different places, have to get between them. Talk to people, because the idea, it may be clear in your head, but how to explain it needs to be taken out. And we're running towards the end of time. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. I will be happy to respond, point you in the right direction. They've got all of my contacts on the table there. Anything we can do, you are not my competition. You're the people who I'm hoping are going to write the next book that I'm going to enjoy and not have to write myself. Any questions?
Would you say that traditional publishing or self-publishing is better?
Every writer that I'm dealing with dreams of getting an agent and getting a traditional publishing contract, because they will go out and publish 1,000, 1,500 copies, and those are the ones that end up in bookstores. Okay, so there's a huge advantage for getting out physically into the bookstores, getting out into Walmart, Costco, every place that puts physical books out. Traditional publishing has a huge advantage for that. Self-publishing is the best way to get noticed, get out there at the beginning. So it's kind of a blend. That's why I'm working with a hybrid. I would love to get to the point where my book is actually shown in the airport bookstores because it's a travel-related book. Have not figured out how to get the right way in there, short of getting traditional publishing. The other thing is, there's a bit of a conflict right now. I'm currently published exclusively on Amazon, using the Amazon store and their wide distribution. So you can buy it on Barnes & Noble from the website, but they won't usually stock it. You have to order it in the store. I'm moving part of this over to Ingram Spark, which has libraries and all of the independent bookstores that don't want to pay money to the company that's putting them out of business. So this means I now have two different dashboards, two different services that I'm trying to sell the same book on, and have to work out the details strictly because Ingram will get me into libraries, will get me to bookstores, and the independent bookstores are the best place to be. And they will only buy if it's not from Amazon. So it's a bit of a kind of balance point for that. Other questions?
Are you going to continue this novel as a series?
Okay, it's a good question. I'm halfway through chapter 3 of the sequel, but it will only be a 2-book series. I've got 3 other series that came to me that I've got written down as outline ideas for after this, and this didn't feel finished to me. I needed to finish it, so I ended up putting the first several pages of chapter 1 of book 2 are inside book 1. You had a question first.
How long did it take you to write?
Much longer than it should have. I took approximately a year to write it, but ran into all sorts of real-world problems. My wife was hospitalized, so I ended up not being able to write while dealing with everything else. It was a little problem, but it delayed the writing. The first 6 chapters took me less than a week to write. The one question somebody asked earlier was, how long did it take me to come up with the idea for this book? And the answer was, I had literally the same dream 3 nights in a row, and the only way it would stop coming was to start writing it down. When I finished, it was the first 6 chapters. But that was literally clean, and then I had to write the outline for everything else. You had a question?
Yeah. Why would you want your book in the library because some people can get it in the day?
Okay, very good question. There are 2 philosophies as to why we write. I write to make money, or I write to be read. I'm writing to be read right now. Yes, my book has covered its costs, and I'm making a small profit on it. I will never make a living on these. To make a living on writing, you have to have something like 20 books written and a back catalog that people buy and things like that. It's difficult to make a living. Lots of people are doing it. I have a number of people I'm working with who are making $6,000 to $16,000 a month on back catalog. They have 20, 25 books, whole series and things. that they're doing, but it means that they've been writing for 5 or 6 years to have the catalog to do this, where you give away the first 2 books and people are paying for the 3rd through 5th. And this is a good idea. I've got one friend who ran into trouble, actually. The reason I won a copy of his book. I won a copy of his book through Goodreads, and I started reading it. It's like, wait, do you realize that on page 114, you have all these HTML codes? Apparently, when it converted to paper, they messed up the conversion. And we've been friends now. He's actually a character in book 2. But what happened is he puts out every month or so, he will do 3 days of free ebook downloads for his books. He wants people to read it. He wants the quantity of readers. He's not doing it for money. Other people read it because this is their living. They want to quit their day job and just write. For me, it's a hobby that pays for itself. Okay, there was one other question over here. Okay.
Would you say that traditional publishing or self-publishing
Which is better?
harder?
Harder. Traditional publishing is much harder. You need to go and write the letter, get an agent who will then take you, unless you can find a traditional publisher that has a rare, unagented submission process. Then they take 3 to 6 weeks, up to 6 months to review it, and then they send you back a form letter that says yes or no. And some people, like I said, some people live for getting that. I've got one friend in New York, she's now on her 3rd agent who wants to represent her. Okay? It's rare. It's a question of how much patience you have and how serious you are. Everybody points to Mark Watley as the debut independent writer who made it big. Okay, everybody's heard of The Martian. Okay? The reality is his debut book was 5 years in writing, and chapters of it were put onto the internet, where he got people at NASA to respond and come back and built a whole community of more than 1,000 different people in science and NASA who were doing it. So then he got a book offer because people started hearing about it. But it took 5 years of self-publishing onto the internet, not even self-publishing the book, just kind of his own blog. He was putting it out. And that's how he got his book deal. I'm in a hybrid. So I'm doing all of the same things that an indie author would, but have an advantage that I've got a publisher behind me. So for example, when I put out the book first came out in March, there's a website called IO9, which is designed for science fiction, fantasy, and gaming comic books that they put out. And once a month, at the first day of the month, they put out an article, what new books are coming out this month in these genres. He sent in a copy, a link to my book and an announcement. They never responded. 1st of March it comes out, 6 p.m., and boom, I'm listed first because I did it alphabetically by day of the month it was released, and I was releasing March 1st. That article coming out bumped me up to number 98 in the Amazon hard science fiction for the first 3 days. So it's getting out there. The people I know who've tried doing that as an independent don't get taken seriously, don't get published. Those who have a publisher sending it in get taken seriously. So it's kind of a balance point of what you're doing and how you want to go. I think we're running short on time, so I can hear the last one.
How did you, find the hybrid to?
I got lucky. My brother-in-law wrote a book and is part of the hybrid, and he introduced me to them. There are probably, at this point, especially in the writer groups that I'm in, there are probably more than 100 different hybrids that are very eager to work with authors because they're groups created by authors. So they're looking to find ways. And the actual hybrid started because somebody wanted to create I don't want to have people contacting me directly, I want them to contact a publisher. So they created a company and just created Purple Toga Publishing as a company entity for people to contact. And then it started expanding to having multiple authors and multiple books. And there's a lot of people who are doing that now, and it makes it a lot more professional looking. It means I get this lovely little purple guy on the side of the book, and get the credibility of having a publishing house behind me, so people take it more seriously. Okay? And I think I'm kind of...
I think you are.
I want to thank Mr. Klein for coming. I think we all would agree that it's really helpful to not only hear from an author, but also to hear from one of our own, because in a few short years, you guys could be in the position that he is. So great questions. Please join me in
There were a bunch of you who asked questions. Come on up.
You asked a question, come on up.
Yeah. The slide is serious. If you have questions, want to follow up, they've got all of my contacts on the table, or you can email them. Everybody hiding in the back. Okay.
Well, when it's 4 o'clock, unfortunately, the exact question.
Kind of expected. Given the choice, people tend not to listen in the front. As it shows.
All right, guys, so let me have your eyes up here. I'm so glad that you could come because I'm thrilled to present our author. And when I say our author, I want to give you a little bit of background. This is Mr. Eric Klein. He's an avid science fiction and fantasy fan, and his interest started right here in South Brunswick, which makes him an interesting person to hear more from. I graduated from the old high school, which you all know as Crossroads South, in 1984, and he's worked since then around the world in the telecom security industry. His novel, The One, A Cruise Through the Solar System, is his first novel. It's set in 2052, and B.J. Armstrong, a noted tech consultant, receives an all-expenses-paid 30-day cruise through the solar system, but soon realizes that the trip is anything but the promised paradise. So please help me in welcoming our visiting author, Eric Klein. And I couldn't let this go because your high school pictures will follow you. Here we have Eric in the left, his senior portrait, and look at the caption, intently watching a video in the library. So everything comes around again, so maybe someday soon I'll have one of you standing here talking about your work.
So for those of you who have, enjoy your hair while you've got it. It does should come back and
No, maybe it didn't. Took a chance.
gotta love it.
I love
There we go.
it. Oh, perfect.
Give me a second for the projector. Okay, so how many of you actually went to what you guys know as Crossroads South? Okay. I got my start in writing on the ground floor in that building facing the school buses, in that little narrow parking lot there. But as I'll explain in a minute, I actually got my world building experience upstairs in the science wing. So, a little bit about me. Graduated from the class of 1984. Yes, they made us read and almost memorize the book. I understand that that's a very popular one here now. Husband, father, grandfather, new grandfather again just yesterday. My daughter gave birth to a baby girl. So, and I'm not going to inflict any of you with the photos of those, I'll save that to other people. My real world life is involved with doing things related to telecom. We look to create services that put WhatsApp into any app. So imagine you can actually talk to the Domino's guy without having to actually dial him when he's delivering, things like that. So my first novel came out back in beginning of March, and I was lucky enough to debut on Amazon's hard science fiction list at number 98, a number that I keep trying to get back to. It's a difficult list. So other things I've written prior to that were more technical. So I wrote about a disaster we had in 1994. The office I worked at, somebody dumped an ashtray into a garbage pail, went home from work. 20 minutes later, we had a fire, $350,000 of computer equipment destroyed, and the fire department said it reached 1,400 degrees Fahrenheit. Needless to say, it was a mess, and that was a Wednesday night. By Monday morning, we were up and running again. So I wrote about what I learned about it. The second one is cybersecurity. I literally wrote the chapter on telecom fraud prevention, Telecom 101. So those are available. I've always been a big reader. Started very young. My mother had me reading her The Little Prince out loud and would correct me when I read things wrong, and I thought it was magic that she knew what I was reading was wrong. But as you read things out loud, you understand that it sounds funny if you get the wrong word and you skip words. And I'll come back to this later because it's a technique you'll need. Okay, as I said, over at Crossroads South, I worked with the English department there, learned to write, still trying to stop putting two spaces after periods because the rules have changed since then. But I actually learned world building in the D&D club sitting in the physics lab. So we had an opportunity to say, okay, we're building our own world. And it was a question of, how does magic work in this Dungeons and Dragons world? So we sat there and we spent 3 weeks designing a solar system with two suns that would work, and how when they were both in conjunction you had magic, and when they were far apart you didn't, and all sorts of things to make it work. And this kind of got me thinking about what makes it work, how does this impact that, changing things as you go along. And this is kind of how I got into the idea of world building. The obvious questions will come, but first, taking a step back, publishing. I know some of you have thought about the idea of writing something, or will think about writing your own books. There are different kinds of publishing today, and I wanted to explain some of the difference. Okay, traditional publishing, I'd say probably 80% or more of the books in the library around you are traditional published through traditional publishing houses. To do that, you're a writer, you get an agent, the agent gives it to an editor, the editor decides, yeah, I like it, we'll publish it. And then they go out and they print out a block of 1,500 copies, and that's one printing. Okay? Now, going back 20 years ago, the publishing house would then worry about editing it, getting a cover artist, doing the marketing, arranging your trips to go to the bookstores and talk about it and everything else. This doesn't happen anymore. They want you to give it to them, finished edit, they'll help with a cover, they want you to go out and do all the social media work, do all of the things you can to help sell the book and push it using all of the things that you guys are doing every day anyway. Twitter, Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, whatever it is, go out there and push the book and try to get people interested. It's like, well, if I'm doing all the marketing and I'm doing all the work, why are you getting most of the money? So then you have the opposite extreme, which is self-publishing. This is where you go out and write it, get your own editor, your own cover, upload it to Amazon or Ingram Spark, and start selling it directly. And again, you're doing all of the advertising and marketing, and it works. Since then, a new category in the last 3 or 4 years has come up called hybrid, which is, it's a publisher who doesn't charge you a lot and doesn't take a big percentage of the money, but they help you get all of the resources and things you need to get the product right. But you're still doing a large part of the marketing and everything else, but you get the bulk of the cash out of the actual royalties. This is currently what I've got. Purple Toga is based out of Sydney. My brother-in-law is an author through the Purple Toga, which is how I got introduced to them. There are at least 100 of these different hybrid companies out there now. And there are advantages to this. A hybrid publisher is a publisher. So when I launched my book, we sent out an email to one of the editors over at a website called IO9, which does science fiction, fantasy, gaming, and related topics. And every month they put out the new books coming out this month article. So I've had a number of independent writers who don't have publishers who send it out, get nowhere. But if you have a publisher who sends it, I got listed first in their March article, and that got me probably about 29 sales on that first day. Because the publisher sent it, it took it a little bit more seriously. They felt that it was a better quality, something because a lot of independent writing is badly written first drafts that are not properly edited. Okay? But while I was starting to do the writing, I got involved with a writing contest. Okay? How many of you heard of Geek and Sundry?
What did you say?
Geek and Sundry? Anybody hear of that? They do a YouTube channel about tabletop role-playing games and all sorts of other computer games. So they were doing a contest on hard science fiction. The top 3 winners got their book reviewed and assistance from the National Science Academy, the same team that goes and does movie checking to make sure that the science in the movies is accurate. Needless to say, I did not come in first, second, or third. I actually came in 6 out of 92. For a book that was half written, I consider that a fairly good success for a first novel. But did not stay with them, did not go in additional options to try and publish to the same group, because it meant marketing out 250 copies, then they would sell out and I'd get royalties on anything after 250. Like, no, it doesn't make sense. So I went and did the hybrid, and I'm doing that now. There's another category, which is vanity publishing, where they ask you to spend $1,000, $1,500 for them to do all the work, and then you get the royalties after. And it doesn't make sense. You almost never make that $1,000 back, and it's strictly I want to have a book so I can give it to people, not that I actually expect it to happen. These days it's not needed. Amazon is real easy to work with. You can write it, upload a picture, upload a PDF file or a Word file, and you're up and running within 2 days. Ingram Spark takes a little longer, but it's worth the effort. Okay. Hello. Thank you. So what is world building? Anybody have any guess?
You build your world.
Again?
I said, where you build your world.
Good start. Come up afterwards. There's a prize for those who answer questions. There's a prize for those who answer questions. I'm not kidding. Okay? So, where you build your world. Okay? Most people I'm talking to are dealing with the problem which I refer to, this will be a good example, the white piece of paper. Where do I start? What do I put in? How do I build it? I tried to explain this to my son by using the concept of a jigsaw puzzle. You take the pile of all of the puzzle pieces and you have no idea what the picture is, you just have the puzzle pieces, you'll go crazy trying to put it together. See, the best thing is usually you start with a corner. Find the corner and start building out from there until you can get the whole picture. You can start building from that. So I try to recommend to people when they are writing, choose a spot, a culture, a style, a person, a technology, a something that you can build, and then start building the pieces that go around it and use that kind of as a center point to expand your world. Okay? You want to write a story about somebody who's going on an adventure? Fine, you've got a point where they started. You know what kind of an adventure. Are they riding a horse? Are they walking? Are they using a spaceship? And each of these questions then builds more of your world. Okay? Now, I went to one of the writing groups that I use on Facebook and basically said, I'm giving a talk to high school students about writing. This isn't the topic I talk about. What should I do? What should I tell them? And they came back with 2 primary answers. Most important thing about doing world building is that the world is easy to believe and is consistent. People who don't write consistent worlds, you read, you go, wait, you said this before, never mind, I put the book aside. You need to make the suspension of disbelief work. You can't just kind of break things and kind of jump around a lot or have inconsistencies. If magic works this way, this way, this way for everybody, but this guy can do it differently, you better have a damn good reason why it works differently or the whole story falls apart and it starts to unravel. Okay? The other part of that is don't go inventing words for common everyday things. Okay? If you ride it from one place to another, it has 4 legs, and you put a saddle on it, call it a horse. I don't care if it's green and has scales. Use words that people can relate to, can understand, so they get a sense of belonging very quickly into your story. I've seen people try and find new ways to describe a utensil with 3 prongs that you use to poke food to eat. Call it a fork. Don't go and create words that you have to for things that are common every day. Make it so that people will understand and be comfortable with it. Okay? The other thing is, building your world is like an iceberg. Okay? You can do an incredible amount of detail, but you're only showing part of it in the story. Robert Heinlein once wrote in Destination Moon 7 pages of notes to describe what was being seen outside the porthole. Were they going past them? Would they see the moon? Would they see the earth? Would they see stars? Would they see the sun? What would they see? In the book, it's a 2-sentence description. In the movie, it's a 2-second flash is what goes past the window. But he spent 7 pages building the concept so it would be consistent for the world he wants. You need to know your world better than what you put into the story for the people, but you don't have to know the whole world. If you're building a story around a village or one country, that's great. Know enough about it that your character can explain it and experience it with the actual reader. Later stories, later parts when you go on, they explore other places. Okay? You all grow up here around South Brunswick. That doesn't necessarily mean you know what it's looked like to walk through Moscow or what it would be to walk through Beijing. These are not places that you as a character would have been. So don't try to build the whole world all at once. Build what you need for now and expand as it becomes relevant. Okay. People get told there are rules to writing. There's a secret to successful writing, etc. There are a whole lot of lists of rules if you look up on the internet. The reality is most of them are garbage. It boils down to 3 basic rules. If you don't write it, it doesn't get written. Kind of surprising little simple rule there. But you can spend as little as 5 minutes a day or 5 minutes a week of writing, and by the end of 6 months of 5 minutes a day, you've got the length of a novel written. First draft. Okay, if you can only do it once a week, it takes you a year. But if you don't spend that 5 minutes and you find, okay, I'm going to spend all this time on Facebook or on Twitter or whatever else instead of writing, it never gets done. And real life gets in the way all the time. Finding that 5 minutes can be a real pain. Okay? Second thing, your English teachers in particular will tell you this: first drafts are not meant to be read. You write it to get everything out as much as you can, as consistently as you can, and before you let anybody else see it, you go back and read it yourself. Because you will find, oh, I meant to say this, or I forgot that, or wait a second, these 7 pages are completely boring, I don't need them there. People are going to put my book down as they go to sleep. I know, I did that. You've all flown an airplane, I presume? You all know that? Okay, you put the seatbelt like this, you unbuckle it like that, you wear the, okay? They give you all of this lecture for safety. And I started to thinking about, okay, you're going on a rocket cruise into the solar system, there's going to be the same kind of safety announcement. So I wrote 7 pages of safety announcement. What to do in a solar flare, what to do with an oxygen. And I went through all of this. And then I went back and I read it and I'm like, this is dry and boring as hell. Nobody's going to read this. So the whole thing came out by the second draft, and only one piece of it got put back in later as a flashback for, oh yeah, I remember he said that if this light goes on, do this. Okay? I mentioned that, yes, they have it, and then he kind of phased out so he didn't listen to it. But you need to know these things. They get into the first draft, that's fine, but you end up finding things that are missing, or you meant to say, or this is what I was thinking and didn't, or no, that doesn't make any sense, let me go back. The first draft is for writing and getting it onto the screen or onto paper. And there are still people who do it longhand or do it on typewriters. It's whatever works for you. I do a lot of notes longhand, and everything is written in Microsoft Word. Okay? The second draft, after you've read it, after you've gone through and fixed them, this is where you can start getting feedback from people. And feedback is incredibly important. Okay, and I'll explain that one in the next slide. Okay? The last and most important thing, any first edition here in the library I will guarantee you has at least one typo or spelling in it, spelling mistake in it, because anything that goes to press, professional, traditional publisher or indie writing, goes out and there are mistakes, things that weren't caught. So I went through 7 rounds of editing between myself. I did Microsoft Word editing for all the Grammarly, went through Grammarly, went through Google Docs, went through 2 professional editors, and I still got to a point where after I published it in this particular version, there's a case where he's sitting at dinner and somebody's wearing a beauty pageant sash that says Miss Universe 2051. And somebody actually asked me afterwards, the book takes place in 2152. Did you really mean for it to be 100 years? I'm like, no, it's supposed to be 1 year. Oops, 2051 versus 2151. Little things slip through even when you have people reading it and helping. So understand that this happens. Do not take it personally. Do not take negative reviews when they write them. Everybody will get a negative review. Take it as somebody bothered to pay money for your book, somebody bothered to read it and felt it was important enough to actually make a comment. Learn from it and fix any mistakes that they mention. Or turn around and go, nope, they're completely full of it, never mind. I've got 1 4-star review on there that I still have no idea what they were saying. It makes no sense. They literally took a random sentence out of somebody else's book and pasted that in as the comment in my review. I have no idea what it meant. I still can't figure out which book it's from. It's very weird, okay? There are lots of resources to help you figure out how to write or what to write. How many of you know Doctor Who? Everybody at least heard of Doctor Who? So we'll start with basic Doctor Who, standard quote. You're sitting in the library. It's one of the best resources you will find between the library and the internet. And I'll be honest, I'm truly suffering where I live because my library has probably about 1 rack's worth of English books. Everything else is written in Hebrew because I live in Israel. Okay? And the number of books I have as resources is very limited there. Okay? So I have to go to another town where they've got a better English library, or I have to use the internet. So the library is filled with all sorts of wonderful resources. How many of you know Game of Thrones? Okay? Game of Thrones is based on a historical event that actually happened, the War of the Roses. He took the same basic concept, the same fights, the same arguments, turned the country upside down and threw in dragons. And this is basically the premise behind Game of Thrones. All of the backstabbing, all of the killing, all of the everything is based on real history. So look at history to find things. Don't stick to Western history, okay? Indian history, Mayan history, there are all sorts of things there that will give you all sorts of great places to build stories and cultures that will build the story and make it believable. And if you do a little research, you can see how people really live there to make sure your characters are living in a realistic way. Next thing is, I work through a couple of different author groups. We do it predominantly through Facebook because we're all spread out over the world. But you have classes, you have critique groups, you can do things here locally. And the idea is these groups are not your competitors. It's other authors, and you're not competing. Every book written is completely independent and not competing with the other ones, even if it's the same topic. And we've had one case where we had 4 people writing variations of the Robin Hood story at the same time. This one was from a married point of view. This one was done on a space station. There's all sorts of weird things, and they're not competing because it's different audiences and different release dates. So the idea is work with groups. We ended up with a case where people start putting up cover art. Do you like this cover or this one? 50 people responded to this and say, we like cover A. 40 of them just said, we like A. 10 of them said, we like A because of X, Y,